Hello YouTube and welcome to another Linux tutorial. So in this video I will show you how to query internet name servers using the Nslookup command. So are you ready? Let's get started. So Nslookup command is a very famous command that is used, even it's deprecated by many Linux admin in order to query internet name servers. Okay, so actually with this command we can use two modes. There is an interactive mode and non-interactive mode. So we will start by the most common one, which is the non-interactive mode. So all you have to do actually is to type your command, so nslookup. So it's always there in most of Linux distribution by default in your system. So by default nslookup command translate actually domain names to IP addresses. So let's try to translate, for example, Microsoft.com command or domain to an IP address. So all you have to do is to type nslookup, then the domain name, and we hit enter. Okay, so what we get here, so by default it will translate this domain name to IP addresses. So here you can see for the server, so this is the name server that is used by default in, for example, here I'm using Ubuntu. So this address 127.0.0.53 is what we call local caching stub resolver. It's used by systemd in most Linux distributions. Okay, and this 53 is actually the default port for DNS queries. Okay, and here you can see non-interactive or authoritative answers. So we have here our domain, and we have here the different actually IP addresses for the Microsoft.com domain. So here you can see that Microsoft.com is using different servers in order to distribute the load for that domain Microsoft.com. So any of these IP addresses will translate to actually Microsoft.com domain. Okay, so this is the basic command that you can use in nslookup, then the domain name, in order to translate domain names to IP addresses. Okay, there is also another thing that you can do. You can do what we call reverse lookup. So reverse lookup, we provide here the opposite. So we provide here the IP address and it will give us a domain name. So for example, if I tap nslookup, and here I'll provide this time not a domain name but an IP address, for example this one, 134.175.46, for example. Here what do we get here? We get here a name or a domain name conformet dash actually logiciel.com. So this IP addresses is now translated to actually a domain name. So that's what we call a reverse lookup. Okay, so it's pretty easy. You have all to provide just an IP address to the nslookup command, and it will give you the domain name corresponding to this IP address. We can also query or get the list of name server or authoritative name servers for a domain. So for example, if I type nslookup, but this time I will provide here an option -type. So I want the name server for a domain. So for example, here I will type ns, which stands for name servers, and here my domain name, so Microsoft.com. So what we get here, so here we get 4 actually name servers authoritative or responsible for that domain Microsoft.com. So you can see also in this case Microsoft has 4 name servers in order to distribute the load for its name servers. So remember that with the option -type equal to ns, we get a list of name servers authoritative for that domain name. Okay. Another type that you can use, so before we use the type ns, which stands for name servers, we can also use type mx. So mx are actually the mail servers for that domain. So when you send actually an email to that domain, it will be routed to mail servers responsible for handling actually email messages. So if we type actually this command here, it will gives us the mail servers for that domain microsoft.com. Here we go. So here you can see that I have only mail server. So this is Microsoft -com.mail.protection.outlook.com. So this is the main mail server for this domain microsoft.com. Okay. And another thing also, we can get some technical information about our domain using what we call start of authority. So if here we type SOA, which stands for start of authority, we get technical information about this domain microsoft.com. Here we go. So here we have our origin, we have the mail address, and we have here some technical information about the domain microsoft.com. So you can get, for example, the mail address for the admin of that domain if it's a small one or something like that. Okay, so it's always good to actually query any domain for the start of authority in order to get a bunch of information about that domain. Okay, so here when I typed in the first command Nslookup and our domain, so Microsoft, I forget here an O. Here, as I told you, by default it uses this name server 127.0.0.53. Okay, why? Because my system is configured to use that server. So if we do a cat of etc.resolve.com, so this file here, you can see the name server here is using 127.0.0.53. okay, but if you want to use another actually name server different for that one, you can use that. So for example, if I want to use not this 127.0.0.53, I can use, for example, the Google DNS-Server. So as you can see, or as you know, the IP address of that server is 8.8.8.8. So here, if I type this command, so you can see here for the server or the address, I don't have any more 127.0.0.53 because here I specified the name server that I want to query, which is in this case the Google DNS server, which has an IP address 8.8.8.8. okay, we can also use a different port. So by default here, as you can see, it uses here the 53 port number, which is the default port for DNS. But let's say if you have a DNS that are using a different actually port number, you can always specify that. All you have to do is to add here option -port equal to the port number. So for example, if you have a DNS server that using 54, as port number, you can specify it here. Okay, so of course here our query will fail because here our default DNS server is using port number 53 and not 54. So you can see here the message connection timeout, no server found could be reached. So actually the default port is not specified. So if I repeat the same command but this time with the port 53, I will get immediately the result because I have the correct port number. Okay. And finally, as I told you, here all the command that I have executed, I used what we call a non-interactive mode, but you can also use Nslookup using the interactive mode. So all you have to do is to type Nslookup, and this time you hit enter. You don't specify the domain name, you hit enter and you get here a prompt. So here you can enter the domain name that you want to query. So for example, let's stick with Microsoft.com and you hit enter, you get the same result. If you want to get the NS server or the name server for that domain, this time you have to enter the command set type equal to NS. Okay, here we go. Then follow it by your domain that you want to query for the NS record. Here we go. You get here your name servers. Okay, if you want to get the MX record or the mail servers for that domain, you have to repeat the same steps, but here you have to set the type to MX and to provide your domain name Microsoft.com. Here we go, and now you get the mail server for that domain. Okay, so this is what we call interactive mode for Nslookup, and of course you quit using Ctrl+C if you want. So I have to say that Nslookup is a deprecated command, but it's still used because it's very famous. But now you can use host or dig commands instead of Nslookup in the future because they will be actually the most common way to use or to query NS record. So that was just a brief introduction how actually to use the Nslookup in Linux. As always, I hope it has been informative for you, and I want to thank you for viewing. Bye bye.